webinar is aiming at presenting you the second draft of the International Generic Indicators for Use and Risk Management of Highly Hazardous Pesticides. And I just wanted to let you know that there was a number of comments and requests from stakeholders asking for a webinar in Spanish. So we scheduled a Spanish webinar on 6th of April, 4 p.m. Central European summertime. So if you're interested in the Spanish webinar, then please spread the news and of course join the webinar as well. So here today we will present you background information, development process, and amended content in the draft 2 compared to the last version. And most importantly, of course, we hope to answer the questions you may have regarding the second draft. The second draft of IGIs for HHPs is currently under public consultation until 11th of April, and we look forward to your participation in the public consultation. My name is Jiwon, the Technical Working Group Coordinator. In this webinar, I'm joined here with Pasi as a Technical Coordinator and Technical Working Group member representatives, including Owen, Debbie, and Colin. We also have our board liaison, Ivona, so thank you all for joining. This webinar will be conducted in English. For your information, this introduction session will be recorded, and the recorded version will be uploaded on the FSC website. The duration of this webinar is 1 hour, including 20 minutes introduction and a 40 minutes question and answer session. The introductory presentation will be structured as follows. We will start the session by providing you with a brief background. Then I will give you some highlights, insights into the development process, and later go into details regarding several standard proposals in the second draft. In the third part, we aim to provide you with a brief overview of the public consultation content. And lastly, we will introduce you the key next steps for the development of the IGI for HHPs. After the introductory presentation, we will have 40 minutes question and answer session, through which we aim to address any questions you may have regarding the second draft. Participants are encouraged to note down the questions in chat box during the presentation. And of course, you are also welcome to raise your hand later during the question and answer session to ask them directly. Questions will be answered after the presentation and in sequence received. So now let's begin with the background introduction. To explain the background of this project, we should go back to the revision of FSC pesticides policy. In line with objectives of the 2015 to 2020 FSC Global Strategic Plan and stakeholder feedback, the FSC pesticides policy was revised to incorporate a risk-based approach that considers not only the hazard of the active ingredient, but also under what circumstances chemical pesticides could be used. The full implementation of the revised FSC pesticides policy requires the development of international generic indicators, so IGIs, for the use and risk management of chemical pesticides and their incorporation to national context. For further background and timeline, please see Technical Working Group terms of reference. You can find it on the FSC website, which is the link below the timeline picture. So in July 2019, the Technical Working Group was established. The Technical Working Group consists of 3 interest-balanced members of the previous Pesticides Policy Working Group. In the table, it's written PPWG, which was approved by the board in 2016, and 3 technical experts with operational expertise in field of pesticides, in particular audit, standard development, and forest management. Now let's talk about the objectives of the TWG, Technical Working Group members, which you can find it in terms of reference as well. First, most importantly, of course, to develop IGI for the use and risk management of highly hazardous pesticides. to enable the implementation of the FSC pesticides policy. Secondly, to develop instructions for standard development groups and certification bodies on how to incorporate the IGI to national forest stewardship standards and interim national standards. Here is a timeline summarizing key milestones of the Technical Working Group work plan. Draft 1 was developed in the end of 2019, and in February 2020, first public consultation on Draft 1 was launched until 1st of April 2020. May last year, the project was on hold, unfortunately, due to COVID until August 2020. And in August 2020, the project got restarted. We grasped the project where it stopped, which was analyzing the comments from the first public consultation and starting to develop the Draft 2. Based on the analyzed comments, Technical Working Group have discussed how to incorporate them in the Draft 2, and we had to replace the face-to-face meeting with many virtual meetings. Last month, the public consultation for the second draft is launched for 2 months, which is until 11th of April. After that, Technical Working Group members will review and analyze the second public consultation comments and start developing final draft and decision package. By September 2021, we are expecting to submit the final draft and decision package to the board and PSC for the review. In the second part of this presentation, we will dive a bit deeper into the Draft 2 of IGIs for HHPs. Starting off by giving you an overview of the draft and highlighting major compartments of each sections of the standards and what have changed from the last version. To see more of the revised contents comparison, please visit FSC Consultation platform and see HHP's IGI's Draft 2 revision crosswork, which is uploaded as a supporting document. The draft can be divided into 2 big parts. So the first one is IGIs that will be incorporated under existing. So that's the current IGI criterion 10.7. It is proposing exchanges to existing IGIs under 10.7, governing the use of all chemical pesticides. And here you can see a screenshot of page 11 from the Draft 2. There has been a format change from the last version. In the Draft 1, we had a table comparing existing 10.7, but in the Draft 2, proposed adjustments are presented in black text. Other than format change, there are also content changes and revisions to add more clarity. So for example, 10.7.4 and 10.7.5 are newly added about affected stakeholders and select option with least social and environmental damages. The second part is IGIs that will be incorporated to current IGI as an annex, which will be mandatory to those who will use HHPs. It is containing 2 subtopics, which are IGIs for the use of all HHPs and IGIs for the use of HHPs by specific hazard criterion. And I'd like to show you some highlight contents and revisions from both of the subtopics. Let's start with the IGIs for all HHPs, what we're proposing and what's revised from the previous draft. The first highlight is, in addition to existing IGI 10.7.3 requirements, the following records of HHP usage and IPM implementation are maintained when one is using HHPs. There are already requirements in existing IGI when it comes to pesticides usage, but when there's a usage of HHPs, then more records are needed. Indicator G, which is highlighted in yellow, is changed from the previous draft to add more clarity about recording of annual volume used. Other highlights are IGI indicator 1.7, 1.9, and 10.11. So 1.7 is about how much information should be provided to affected stakeholders. Highlighted C is slightly changed from the previous version. Statement about period of re-entry is removed. On 1.9, the technical working group worked on clarity of when government is ordering the use of HHPs. And 1.10 and 11 are newly added indicators, requirements about researching alternatives to replace HHPs, and about training. Both were not clearly captured in the previous draft, so here we try to add them as an indicator. From the previous version, indicator about FPIC, so free, prior, and informed consent is removed. New suggestion in the draft 2 regarding this topic is covered under new 10.7.4, so proposed indicators and IGIs under 10.7, and in new 1.3, since this topic is also addressed in the ESRA process. Now let's take a look at highlights from the subtopic 2, IGIs for hazard groups. Before we dive in, let me introduce you how the specific hazard criterion are divided. This table that you are seeing is from pesticides policy. The hazard group and criteria for the identification of highly hazardous pesticides is from pesticides policy, and accordingly, we are proposing IGIs indicators governing the use of HHPs by each hazard criterion. Now, let us go through some common highlights contents and what have been revised from the last version. Same as existing IGI, there are instructions for standard developers and also indicators for each hazard criteria. Let's start from the introduction for standard developers section and the guiding documents for standard developers. In the slide, you can see the example of IGIs that meet hazard criterion 1. We are proposing a list of documents that standard developers shall either reference or include in the relevant aspects, hoping that this is helpful for them when developing national standards and international national standards. A revised content is highlighted in yellow on the right-hand side, taking comments from the first consultation that there are national documents SDGs can refer to, which is not listed in the following document list. There is newly added content in the bottom of the instruction as well, which covers topic of treatment and compensation of human health. Here, I'd like to briefly show you what is our new suggestions on indicators level, which applies similarly to each hazard groups. On the screen, you can see hazard criterion 3, carcinogenic, as an example. First of all, we moved the order of an indicator regarding biomonitoring. Since technical working group find biomonitoring as a key element for the IGI HHPs for health and safety of workers and affected stakeholders. So we moved it up. Secondly, an indicator about compensation is added as we have received a number of feedbacks regarding this issue. Next, text box in each hazard criterion are moved to biomonitoring guidance document, which you can find as an annex in a synopsis report. And lastly, a note to standard developers has been added to guide them to Appendix 1. As a last highlight, Appendix 1 has been revised to make it more user-friendly. Now, explanations for each column titles are available with notes on frequency and duration column explained. Here is a part of revised Appendix 1 screenshot. We hope the medical biomonitoring column, which gives you the least expensive and most accessible option, is helpful, along with the frequency and duration column, explaining how frequently and when you have to conduct such biomonitoring. So these were some short highlights of the draft 2. From here, I'd like to provide you an overview of public consultation structure. The public consultation starts with introduction and background session. From this section, you can find why we're developing IGIs for HHPs, composition of technical working group members, and set of the projects, such as who is responsible for what. followed by introduction and background information. You can find general information of this project, which is about the aim of this group, and also some points that technical working group should consider when developing the IGIs. And in the introduction to the second draft section, a development process of draft 2 is summarized. After the introduction sections, the questions to stakeholders begin. The first topic is about biomonitoring, and there are 3 topics that the technical working group would like to ask regarding biomonitoring topic, and I'd like to quickly go through them. First, if the biomonitoring requirement is clear enough, and if certification holders have such capacity to conduct it. Second, is there any other scientifically based tests for biomonitoring? And third, biomonitoring requirements on contractors. The second topic is about instruction for standard developers. This question is about ILO, Code of Practice Safety in the use of chemicals at work, including the right to refuse the use of HHPs. And here the third topic is about auditability. And this question is specifically for certification body if they consider the IGI auditable in its current form. The last topic is about synopsis report annexes documents. As you have seen it, I hope, so technical working group developed a series of documents that provide guidance and further clarification to some aspects in the draft. And we would like to hear from you which of them you find useful. And this ends the consultation. Concluding the introductory presentation, I'd like to give you a brief overview of the key next steps for the further development. In February, the public consultation for second draft is opened until 11th of April. So from April on, we'll analyze the feedback from you and start developing the final draft through a series of virtual meetings. And hopefully by September, it is planned to deliver final draft and decision package to board and KFC. This concludes the introduction to the webinar. Thank you very much for your attention. Before we go to the question and answer session, I'd like to ask technical working group members if there's anything they'd like to add in introduction part. So you can unmute yourself, technical working group members, and of course Pasi as well, if you'd like to add something. And Ivona, you're also welcome to comment.
Hi, Jiwon. I just wondered whether it was worth highlighting one other thing that's been taken out in this draft, which was in the first draft, there was a requirement if certificate holders were instructed to use a prohibited highly hazardous pesticide by governmental order. We'd originally included a requirement that they had to communicate with the relevant government department about FSC's requirements and suggest alternatives. And after discussion, we agreed that wasn't a reasonable burden to place on certificate holders. So that's been taken out in this draft, and we'll try to address it elsewhere in the FSC system. And I think the only other thing I wanted to say is that we had a lot of feedback in the first consultation, and a huge amount of effort went into reading all of those comments and discussing them, I think, on the basis of the feedback we've had so far from the webinar we held last week. I think we haven't successfully resolved all of the concerns that were raised in that first consultation, but we're still listening and we're still open to solutions.
Thank you, Owen. Thank you very much. Yes, Debbie, please go ahead.
I think from my side, I know, and we do realize that the biomonitoring is a new thing for most of the certificate holders, and that it seems that it's an insurmountable mountain to climb. but we have tried to make it easier to understand in the second draft by compiling the guidelines and to try and make it easier to understand. And a lot of effort went into trying to find the cheapest and the most accessible biomonitoring tests to do. But what we also need to understand that if we use less HHPs, we wouldn't have to do biomonitoring. So I think that's also an important point to understand, that biomonitoring is only required for highly hazardous pesticides. And the key here is the frequency and duration of the utilization of those highly hazardous pesticides. So I think as we go through and as we work through the biomonitoring sections, the more you use it, the more you'll have to test for it. And I think that's the guidance that we need to give. Thank you.
Thank you, Debbie. Colin, would you like to add something?
I guess I had better. Good evening, everybody. Look, just really want to support the comments from both my colleagues, in particular, Owen, yours, that every piece of feedback we received, we considered. So I do urge people to submit, and particularly if you've got good examples of where things may or may not work in your situations, those are valuable, as well as some alternative wording or suggestions. They really help us as well. So please submit. I know it's a big job when we get all your points made, but we did go through every single piece of submission and consider it. And for Debbie's comment as well, yes, for me, biomonitoring is one of the key parts of this. And I do want people to think about the work that we've done on the exposure triggers, which Debbie mentioned. You know, if you use more or expose people to more of highly hazardous pesticides, then the biomonitoring clicks in. But have a look at those exposure triggers, because to me, those are quite important things to consider when we get your feedback, and I really look forward to it. Thanks.
Thank you, Colin. Pasi, as a technical coordinator, would you like to add something?
I'm happy. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Ivona, as our liaison board, if she's still here, would you like to add anything? I'm going to unmute you.
Hello, good morning.
Hi,
here
morning.
Yes, good morning here from Brazil. And I just wanted to say that was really a huge work of this technical working group. And I really invite everyone to participate in the consultation process now, like it was said before, providing feedback on, cases where you think that things are not going to work, why, and making examples, and this can help this technical working group. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ivona, for your comment. So now let's move on to the question and answer session.